Hello, everyone. Welcome to this very special dialogue at the crossroads. Today, we come together here not with a fixed agenda. We are here with an open heart and shared curiosity towards the same theme of self awareness, self acceptance, and what it really means to live life inside out. We're honored to be guided by Douglas, who will share his experience and offer reflections along the way. He will hold the role of an elder in this conversation. And I'm also very honored to be joined by two inspiring women who carry their own unique perspective. And I would love for us to take a moment to introduce ourselves so we can get a sense of who's in the circle and what really brought us here. Let me just begin. By the way, I am Kathy from the Philippines. I've been traveling for, let's say, living abroad for 10 years now. And what brought me in this conversation is that I'm always, I caught myself every time speaking with people in a very unexpected way when it comes to like belongingness, self-awareness, self-acceptance, and what it really means to live life from within. So these people felt like lost in life. But then that also gave me the understanding and reflection that an ongoing journey learning to embrace all parts of myself is also part of it. And it continues to grow within me as I travel and talk to these people. And being in these spaces like this reminds me that we don't have to walk in this path alone. There's wisdom in listening to each other's stories. And now, Eva, would you like to share something about yourself?
Sure, thank you very much. I'm very happy and excited to be here. So, I'm Eva. I'm from Russia, St. Petersburg. Basically was born and raised there nearby. I started traveling quite young. I was 14, so I did modeling as a teenager, and I went to Japan, South Korea, China, Italy, and that lasted for around 3 years, these like on and off trips. So that gave me the first like idea of what it feels like to live in another country, to try to adjust to a different culture. That was very interesting, and I guess at that point I realized that at first this is something I definitely want to do more of because it opened me to the experience, but also that it could be quite challenging. It could be not entirely possible to like fully fit in. So yeah. Then I also had a chance to go to Brazil when I was doing my exchange, and I guess until I was 27, I was still pretty much living in St. Petersburg. And then I decided to give it another shot and go to travel. So I went to Asia. I started with Bali and Thailand very briefly, and then I came to Vietnam. There was no plan, no expectations. I knew very little about this beautiful country, and I just randomly ended up in Hoi An, which I'm immensely grateful for because I was blessed to meet wonderful people. Douglas, Kathy, like I met a year ago, basically. So Hoi An, yeah, it's probably the first place that made me want to stay, and it did feel like home. And so here I am still now. I decided to move here for some time. We'll see where life takes me. But yeah, as Kathy said, such conversations, like all the conversations I've had with people here were very insightful, both in terms of like help me understand more about myself and learn the stories of others. And I greatly appreciate this opportunity to have another conversation with you guys. Thank you.
It's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing, Eva. And let's hear from Marie.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Marie. I was born and raised in France, but my parents are Vietnamese, so I am what we call the Viet Kieu. And I grew up with both cultures, so Vietnamese culture at home and the French culture outside. And at some point in my life, I think I wanted to experience what it is to be a Vietnamese because it's part of my origins, it's part of my roots. And I've been traveling for 8 months now in Vietnam with my son, who is 12, and he is the one who had this idea to explore our origins. So here I am in Hoi An, exploring my identity, kind of. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here because my job is I am a soft skill trainer and a professional coach. So actually, I think my job is what we are going to do right now. It's like having a discussion, trying to explore the insight from of a person to see how this person expresses itself and how it shows from the outside. And it's always interesting to understand the world and understand the people around us. So I'm very happy to be with you guys.
Yeah, so this dialogue isn't about chasing the right answers, but about being honest and, you know, curious and open to whatever comes. So yeah, together we'll just see what unfolds. So I would love to invite Douglas to introduce himself and share some opening reflections as he holds the elder role in this conversation.
Thank you all for coming. And I've spoken with each of you individually in the past, so I have a sense of the kind of conversations that we might generate. And so I was very pleased to say, okay, let's experiment to see if we can create a dialogue and actually make a video of this so that we could potentially pass along some of what we're sharing together. At the age of 55, I decided that if I just kept doing what I was doing, I would work my way to retirement. And I decided to take a year off and travel would be something that I had wanted to do most of my life. So at the age of 55, I became a backpacker, and I traveled through Southeast Asia, India, and Central America. And at the end of that year, I wanted another year, but I wanted, instead of traveling, to locate somewhere, and I chose Vietnam to be that place. So getting near the end of that second year, I'm kind of on the fence. Should I stay or should I go? And what happens to this experience? Does it fit into my life? And, you know, a lot of questions. And somebody said, well, did you decide to abandon your career? And I said, no, actually, I didn't. And they made the suggestion that I try to do my career as a psychotherapist in Vietnam. So I said, okay, I'll give it 3 months. I'll find out if that works or not. I went to Hanoi. Within 2 weeks, I had both a teaching position at a university, teaching Introduction to Psychology, and Family Medical Practice hired me as a psychotherapist. And here I am, 15 years later. I've been practicing as a psychotherapist ever since. And in the meantime, I wrote a book, which is part of what's generating this discussion. It's called Living from the Inside Out. Actually, it has 3 parts. Part 1 is called Begin Within. Part 2 is called Alone Together. And part 3, which I want to reference in some of our discussion, is called The Needs of Childhood and the Tasks of Adulthood. So I'm sure this will come out in the conversation we're having.
I have a question, Douglas.
Yeah.
Like, when you felt like the sense of wondering has come to an end, have you had that inner conflict within yourself, whether should you continue, should you go back to your old life, or will you step towards a new life, but, you know, which means like stepping into the unknown? And, you know, our minds always gives us all of these questions, all of these doubts and fears. Have you experienced that, and how do you deal about it?
I definitely experienced it because embracing something new also means letting go of what existed before. And I lived in Seattle, and I had a community and friends and a career, but somehow the newness won out. I think the first 4 years, I was on this fence of should I stay, should I go, and one thing I learned was that rather than to live in that question every day, I decided, okay, in June every year, I'll make a decision. Until then, I'm gonna be here. And at that point, I will make a decision, and it'll be either for another year or it will be go back. And that really worked well for me because having the ambivalence and the uncertainty was too hard.
Okay.
I did go back every summer, partly because I had promised my mother that I would come visit. If I'm going to live halfway around the world, I would also come back and visit. So I would go back every summer. And each summer after the 4th year, I started reducing my possessions and getting rid of things. And basically, as time went on, I became further and further into the commitment of being here. And I don't remember exactly what it was, maybe the 6th or 7th year. It was like, okay, this is my life now. And I have felt that ever since.
So you had like checkpoints, you know, like self-assessment every year, and it landed during June.
Yep, that was my method, and probably because I had worked in schools for many years of my life, and so June was like the end of the school year, and then you have summer, and so I was going back in the summer. So yeah, that really helped me to decide, because and then instead of being, and I'd say the other thing that helped me was that I kept having more and more clients who were seeking my help, and I was part of a group that started the Hanoi Counseling Psychology consultation group with other therapists. So I became more and more grounded and a part of the community that I was interested in. And then in 2018, I decided to take a sabbatical, I called it. And I spent 3 months traveling back to the States. And then I took 3 months to write the book. And I came to Hoi An, and I stayed in this great place near the beach. And nobody knew I was here, so I was totally focused on what I was doing. And somehow these 3 books, actually, at the time I thought it was 1 book, but it's too much, so I divided it into 3 parts. And then I went back to Hanoi, and I continued to work, and then I thought, I loved Hoi An, why don't I just move back here, which I did, the beginning of the end of 2019, just before COVID. And then I was here during COVID when there was no tourism and nothing going on. And it was actually very ideal for me because it was quiet, and the beaches were quiet, and I really found this is my place.
A perfect space to just land and, you know, create, right? And you mentioned about the book, and I've read the first part. I really love the idea of, not idea, because this is a real concept that we all human are experiencing right now, like living from inside out, aligning what you're thinking, how you feel, and what's outside. So for you, when did you realize that, okay, this is time for me to, you know, like live the life that I want from what's within? When did it started?
Well, for me, I would have to say it goes quite far back, because there was a point in time when I was quite young, maybe around 18 to 20, where the family culture that I lived in was immersed in a religious culture that as a young man I began to question. And there was a point, I think I was around 20, where I ended going to church and being a follower of the religious group that I was raised in. So this catapulted me into a life that sort of separated me from my community, my family and community. And I look back, and I think most of my 20s, I was quite lost and confused. I knew more who I wasn't than who I was. And at some point I left my hometown. I moved to Seattle, which was, you know, stepping into anonymity. Nobody knows me here. Nobody has any expectation of me. And I fumbled my way through my 20s and into my 30s. And I think most of the time getting closer to an understanding of what it meant to be true to myself. And that, I think, was part of the reason why I decided to be a therapist, because of that exploration, that sense of discovery, self-discovery, was something that I went through personally, including with the support of therapy. And I felt like this is the journey that I'm most interested in. How do I know myself in a way so that my life is a reflection of what represents that inside, that deeper sense of who I am. And so for me, this is the theme that comes through my book and the conversations I have is, okay, how do we self-knowledge, okay, leads to self-acceptance. Okay, and self-acceptance is the platform from which we grow into our potential. Okay, if we don't accept ourselves, then we're swimming in the pool of our own limitations. Okay, where our insecurities or our doubts and fears have a big influence on how we go about life. So. Yeah.
So it started young.
Yeah.
You started young.
Yeah. With naively, very naively. I didn't know, what I was signing up for. And believe me, I didn't take a straight path. I wandered and experimented and made mistakes and did all the things that, come with learning. And learning who I am and how I fit in this bigger world. So.
May I ask a question here? Yeah. Because I feel like the discussion naturally came to the point that I actually wanted to discuss about self-awareness and, later self-acceptance. I guess, focusing on the first point, self-awareness. I first of all just wanted to say how much I appreciated reading your book. It's amazing. And I got a feeling, mostly book gives some guidelines to people of how they can step closer to self-awareness and later self-acceptance by themselves, through observing themselves, through listening closer to emotions, body, educating themselves about it. But to what extent do you think it's possible to achieve that? So I'm not even talking about self-acceptance, just self-awareness for starters, outside of a therapeutic relationship. So the reason I'm asking that, I myself have spent quite a few years, I'd say, reflecting consciously. So I've been also interested in psychology for a while, so it's been on my mind, and I was self-reflecting a lot, and I was trying to identify my patterns, but also being having a depressive personality type, let's say. I would almost enjoy identifying all of my faults, and I feel like no matter how objective I'm trying to be, if the person is doing it on their own, they still don't get a proper mirror, and the look from the outside is very important. That said, other relationships, I guess, could also be therapeutic, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a psychotherapist. But still, what's your take on it as a professional? To what extent a person can achieve that state by themselves without professional help?
So the question, I think, is a really valid one, and it was a question I asked myself in writing this book. Can a book supplement self-therapy? And I actually made reference to a very famous woman psychologist named Karen Horney, who advocated self-therapy and saying that self-therapy is actually a higher form because we can take responsibility for the things we've learned. And but I did question that, and my thought is that it's a good place to start, and a person can delve into this kind of exploration, and at any point can realize, wow, there's more here than I thought, this is more difficult than I thought, and then they can seek a therapist, or in many cases sometimes it's friends or family members who serve as a sounding board for. I would say the second answer to the question is very much related to how prepared or ill-prepared we are for adult life. Okay, and this goes back to my third book, which is identifying what I call the needs of childhood. Now, in that book, I'm not talking about survival needs. I'm talking about the needs we have in order to be self-actualized, to live fully in a way that allows us the freedom to discover our potential, or what I refer to in the book as our whole true self. So I'm sure you know there are many people for whom those needs are barely met or unmet. Neglect, abuse, childhoods devoid of the support that is necessary will mean then that the journey begins with a deficit, with having to figure out what are the things that are the biggest obstacles for my life. So I would say it wouldn't be an expectation that a person could sort of work through those challenges alone.
In my experience, for example, I was aware of myself at the age of 35 when I checked all the things that my parents asked me to do, which is having a job, earning money, and having a family, and all these things that I did, and then realizing that actually I'm still not happy, so what's going on? And then what it reflects inside of me, like you said, you know, in your childhood, in my childhood, I didn't have the knowledge of what's the meaning of emotions, for example. Why am I angry? I didn't have the maturity to question myself about, you know, all these things that happening inside of me. But from the outside, it was all about crying and being sad and not feeling alive with myself. So I guess, you know, at some point, the society will say to you that you need to raise your children the way that they have to be conformed to a certain status, a certain way of being. But then, like you said, we don't have the clue, we don't have the tools to understand and to decoding ourselves. So then, for me, it happened late, like 35. I was already a mother, I was already, you know, grown up, and I was living by myself. But then I had this question of, wow, I'm a mother. What do I want to transmit to my son? What do I want him to have as an example? Is it a follower, or is it something that, okay, maybe it's not the scheme that my parents wanted, but maybe it's mine, and maybe it's better to show him that, you know, you can just be okay and you just be happy by being aligned and not with all this money and all these material things, you know.
Oh, thank you so much for this comment. Actually, it's relatable in a way that, yeah, you mentioned that you had all the, let's say, external success, and it didn't feel satisfying at all. And I guess I caught myself having that, well, when I was younger, but maybe when I finished my bachelor's. And yet emotionally I was a wreck, and I felt that I had zero sense of agency. So my parents are not that much involved in my life anymore. I mean, they're not the main stakeholders anymore, because I'm a grown-up. Like, it's time for me to want things, and I have not developed the capacity to want. But also you mentioned the tools that a person should be equipped with. And this is pretty interesting, because actually I am grateful to my mother for educating and informing me about a variety of tools, because she is a psychologist. She does have the competence in there. But I also feel like, I mean, yeah, I know about that, but then there is this gap between knowing and feeling. And having a role model, what you mentioned, that you want to become a model for your kid, is actually so much more important than having somebody to tell you what, like, you're supposed to do and what you can use. Yeah, so that's just a comment.
A common theme throughout the world. I mean, we're a collection of people from different places. But it's not an uncommon thing that we grow up out of our childhood trying to meet expectations that are external to us, whether it's our parents, our teachers, our peer group. We look outside and we try to match, to fit in, to belong. And this is all part of the need we have for acceptance. We look for approval and validation, and it's an external view. And it comes often at the expense of this self-knowledge that we're talking about. It's a very different thing to look inward and ask ourselves the question, what do I like? What do I want? What is congruent with me in the way that I go about my life? So often that's one of the first things we have to overcome, is do we follow the script that our family, our parents, our society has generated for us? Or do we let go of that expectation and turn inward to know more about the source of who I am? And I think this is, some people make that shift and are willing to go through that. Some people aren't. Often, in my case, you know, deciding that I wasn't Christian in the way that my family was, meant I not only had to leave the religion I grew up in, but I had to separate from my family. And so at that point there wasn't much choice but to follow whatever that intuition was, you know. So.
And I think it's a good test to see if your community really loves you, in a sense that, you know, despite the fact that you're doing something different, you know, and your community, I would take the example of my mom, for example. She was not okay with the fact that I divorced. She was not at the beginning okay with the fact that I would be traveling here. But regardless that, I can feel her love yet. And it's really important because I saw now that she loves me for who I am and not for what I do. So doing the things from the outside, and I think it's very powerful, because some people, then you will test, and if the person is not okay with you, because before I used to work in luxury, for example, so I don't have discount anymore. So if people are not in my life anymore because I'm not working in luxury, for example, then you see, oh, maybe it was not real friendship, or maybe it was not true love. And this is why, to me, it's so important to be aligned with yourself. And like you say in your book, when you are aligned with your thoughts, your emotion, and your behavior, it's just showing congruence. And congruence makes you, aware and okay with yourself, and then it can reflect on your relationship.
It gets to a question that I think is a profound one. This notion of having a whole true self. I make some references, you know, Shakespeare, Hamlet, to thine own self be true, beyond all things, you know. Most of the psychologists, Maslow and Carl Jung, and, you know, make reference to the actualization of oneself. But I don't think that idea is always cultivated. And do you feel like there's such a thing as a Kathy that is exists that you can draw on?
For me personally, it's a little bit different, because my mom always tells me that I'm stubborn. I always follow myself. I have my own will. Because every time I speak with her and I asked about, okay, was I like this before, Mama? Like, I have a really strong sense of autonomy. And then she tells me, like, yeah, you do your thing. So looking back, I can see that I was really following what feels good, because I feel like if it doesn't feel good in my body, I can't push myself to do it. So in the beginning stage of my life, of course, I followed what was presented. Okay, studies and all this stuff. And I have, with this awareness right now, I have seen that I attached myself with my worthiness of my academic results. But my mom cannot validate it. So it's totally like different, like, oh, this is what I have, this is I'm worth, but I don't get validation, like what's happening here, until I got to a point where I just relaxed, like, no, this is not my worth. I want to live my life happy and fun. But so that actually was at the stage of university times. And I was surrounded with people also who are really good with academics and all this stuff. But that sense of Kathy inside has been cultivated so strongly since I was a kid, because I wasn't really neglected. I'm an only child, but it's just that in our society it's totally different, because it's not totally different. We are so family oriented. A lot of societies right now, especially Asians, we're so family oriented. But Western society, it's totally different also, right? You have a very strong sense of individuality. So for me, I fought through that kind of society, like finding myself. And since growing up, I had that kind of GPS, let's say, internal GPS. When I questioned everything, like, is this it? Like, is there more to life? I graduated as a nursing student. But then after I graduated, I really have this strong sense, calling of like, I want to practice my English. So instead of practicing the profession, I took a different route, which my family felt so disappointed, especially with my mom. She raised me as, like single mom. My dad died when I was young. So her validation, her way of perspective towards me is really something that I value. But then, of course, this strong sense of Kathy always comes first. So I took different path. I slowly follow that, and it's slowly kind of like, as what you've said, you just started what feels right. And then I followed to move away. And right now looking back, I can see that for my mom, she really wants me to check the bucket list of what society is presented, right? But she also accepts, since she knew me so well, that I cannot impose this to Kathy because she's so stubborn. So she let me go.
Both of you are describing that and I think Eva's story is similar, because I know a little bit, but the fact that we have to navigate our parents' idea of what they value in us, I think is a very important thing. I think it's quite common that performance and image end up taking priority over essence. Okay, essence is that place within us that's not about how well we do something or how we look. It's a central to this intuition that you described, that says, I made this decision because I was being true to something that I couldn't deny. We can go a long time before we realize that's what's happening. But at some point, that is what's happening.
Actually, yeah, may I add something here, because it's very interesting what you said, that the story that we share, and I agree that to some extent, I guess I also face this conflict, let's say, of doing not what I wouldn't say not what was expected. I never had any explicit expectations, but what I guess felt right to say my mother. But the thing is that actually my situation is a bit on the opposite side of the scale, too much involvement, too little involvement. Like as I mentioned, my mom, probably being a psychologist, she was trying to be really good as a mother, and she was trying to give me as much freedom as she could always. So I actually feel like I lacked explicit guidance. So she might have had her internal expectations, and needs and wants, but she wouldn't verbalize them explicitly, and it was always like, you do whatever you want. Like, I was never really disciplined, I was never forbidden anything. She let me go alone to Japan when I was like 14, and I mean, not every parent would do that. And she never involved, I mean, I say she because it's like she was like the main caregiver. Nobody was ever involved in my school. I was a straight A student, but no one ever checked my homework or pushed me, so it was like internal, yeah, I must be good. So that was my motivation. Nobody cared that I graduated from a fancy business school. So I felt like my parents didn't really care, but at the same time, I still did not develop, I have by now, but at the time I hadn't developed this capacity to understand what I want. So it's pretty interesting, you know, when you have too much pressure, you go through too much resistance. It's really, it jeopardizes your ability to function as an adult. But then it seems like when there is too little, or maybe when, you know, there is this incongruency between what a parent feels and what a parent explicitly says, and when the explicit guidance is just not there, like there is a void. Somehow it's not being filled with self. It's just, well, for me, for many years, it stayed being a void before I could start, like, very slowly, step by step, like trying to identify, as you said, what feels right in the body. So I think I'm only now becoming to get in touch with it, just a little bit, like baby steps.
It's a good example of how different each one of us is because of whether and how our needs were met or not. And of the 7 needs that I've identified for book 3, guidance is one of them. And guidance, simply defined, is the relationship between structure and freedom. Too little structure, which is what you're describing, dissipates the energy. It doesn't channel, it doesn't give a person a set of choices to choose from. It gives them more than maybe they're ready for, okay? And so that dissipation of that energy becomes its own problem. Of course, too much structure, too high of expectations, or too much criticism can also thwart the person's freedom to discover who we are. So these are very different challenges right from the early stages of life.
And you know, I think the tools I mentioned before is simply communication with your child for your child to be capable of navigating within his emotions and so on. So what you say, I'm trying to give Leo this image of a pool. Like, you're a child, so if I throw you in the sea and you don't know how to swim, of course you're gonna die. So it's very dangerous if I don't put the limits. But at the same time, you're 12, so if I put you in a very small pool, you're gonna get bored. So it's going to be not so. My responsibility as a parent is to find a balance between, okay, you can have fun, but also you can learn. But it's very complicated, and it took me my whole life to understand that, you know, these tools are just to show him how it works, because by the end of the day, you will always have emotions, you will always have thoughts, you will always have things that doesn't fit good. But if nobody told you how it works, then it's normal that you kind of tend to be lost at some point in your life.
It's part of what makes life safe, okay, is when we can trust the adults in our life to create the structures that allow for both what you described so well, the freedom to explore and the safety of knowing someone is bearing responsibility for me. Because every step and stage is a dynamic change of what it is that's happening. And so having a son and being in the process of being that provider, it's often one of the times when people are also reflecting on themselves and going, what was that like for me, and how much of that did I get or not get, you know? And I just want to make one comment about emotions, because emotions are often what come into life in the ways in which change occurs, okay? When we have strong emotions, and one of the things I think I've gained an insight is that emotions are one of the ways we learn about who we are, okay? We don't choose our emotions. It's a response to circumstances. But we can learn from why am I feeling that way. And the other thing that we can do is learn how to regulate, okay? Intense emotions are generally problematic, okay? Because they narrow the way that we think, and we are much more likely to react rather than respond. And so I'm just thinking of raising a 12-year-old and thinking about, okay, so much of it has to do with allowing for these feelings, but also how do we regulate? How do we keep it from becoming intense? Teenagers are often quite intense, you know.
So yeah, Leo is really lucky to have Marie as a mom because she's raising him consciously. But what really, you know, I have this question in my head right now because, like you as a man, for us women, it's like women are emotional. That's already like accepted reality. But for men, you were taught not to cry at a young age. You can't cry. You can't show weakness. Don't let anyone, you know, see your emotions because they will use it against you. You must be strong. For you, as you know, who you are right now, how did you navigate that? Because I also feel so bad about how men were raised, you know, because they're always the one, oh, because of men. The society always blames men, and then I mean, women for sure has their own different journey, but I have a different perspective towards how the journey it is for the men. Like not being, for us, it's easy to connect with our emotions, but for you, you were so suppressed. Like, how did you do that?
How did I do it? Wow, not
How do you
so
navigate?
beautifully. I was such an
So
angry young man,
disconnected.
let me tell you. There's a part in the book that I call the socialization of emotion, okay? And not only is there a gender difference, which emotions are acceptable, because we could say that anger is an acceptable emotion for men, but not for women, okay? Where sadness, grieving, is much more of an acceptable. Now, of course, there's also culture. You know, we could say Italian and Japanese might not have the same emotional training or experience because of the culture looks at emotion and validates emotion differently. So these are very important things to realize. But I think there was a book that came out, I think in the 90s, that was very revolutionary. It was called Emotional Intelligence.
Daniel Goleman.
Yes, Daniel Goleman.
of course.
And I think in the world of psychology, maybe this book was one of the biggest influences because it changed the idea that intelligence was simply how much you could, you know, regurgitate, how much you could remember. And he basically rewrote the idea that when we do exactly what I'm advocating, know ourselves and regulate our emotions and express who we are from an understanding of that, and then we are actually more intelligent, okay, socially intelligent. And I think this is the world we're in now. While I certainly do see that, yes, we all come from these cultural and gender influences, I do think now we're much more likely to be able to express ourselves emotionally. And that's what's also so great about living in Vietnam and sharing experiences cross-culturally. Because now we can have this conversation, each one of us coming from our own background, but we have a new norm, you know. We can talk about these things because we're in a new territory. We're at the crossroads of culture and even age differences, you know. So
On that note, I actually, this thought has just popped up in my head. I mean, this reflection, I guess, about anger, like anger, sadness, men, women. I'm just wondering if it's kind of the opposite in Russia or not, because I'm also very used to this concept that for women it's okay to express sadness, for men it's okay to express anger, and in my personal story, like being a female, yes, I have this trope. Sadness and apathy were probably what I experienced in my teenage years. Say anger, it's still a bit difficult to integrate, like my aggressive part. But like with our history, like with the history of my country, I wouldn't say that on average in society you see men expressing more anger than women. Well, first, lots of them, like so many men just died, so they were like fatherless generations, because after the Second World War there weren't many men left, and it was up to women to, you know, to rebuild the country. And if I think about, you know, like culture, the jokes that people say, anecdotes that they tell, like the general like emotional landscape of the society, I have a feeling like it's women who actually tend to get pissed off and be angry, and men who are sort of have to be, you know, like cautious around women. And if you, I mean, it's not the same at all if you compare it to the situation in the United States, I don't know, say in the 50s, when there was this whole problem of oppressed housewives, let's say. Like we had a very different situation just because of the demographic situation, because of history. And yet, I'm not sure that when it comes to suppressing certain emotion, it's crucial, you know, whether you're allowed or not allowed to express it as a woman or as a man. Because if you're a woman and you have women around you and they don't like that you're getting angry, even if they allow themselves to get angry all the time, it could be just as much pressure. So, I mean, I feel like it's more about your like close circle and who you're surrounded with, and maybe the primary caregivers in terms of regulating emotion, rather than society in general. Although, of course, it has some influence.
You know, when I train in this topic about emotional intelligence, I like to do this survey first, like raise your hand if when you were a kid you were allowed to express any type of emotions, like sadness and anger. And most of the time nobody raised their hands. So I'm like, see, regardless of the fact that you're a man or woman, nobody told. And like you say, you know, the book just came out in 1990. So then I say, like, imagine the humanity, how long we exist. And when we just started talking about emotion as an intelligence and just like this GPS that is internal to us. So I think it's not just about, you know, of course the education, men were not really allowed to cry and so on, but also women had different stories. But it was kind of the same. We had both suppressions of our emotions. And I like to think emotions like an email, you know, because the email is supposedly give you an information about how you feel and what is it. And if you tend to ignore your emails all the time, then you will have a kind reminder, and then it won't be so kind reminder, and then it explodes. So instead of, you know, not dealing with your emotion, just, the first step will be to regulate them, to better understand what does that mean to me. And I like to have also this image of, okay, if I am angry, I will try to visualize this anger knocking on my door and say, hey, I'm your anger and I'm telling you to what? So then I can just better understand that, okay, I'm not being overwhelmed by my emotions, but I'm trying to have a conversation with it and to have something peaceful so that I can regulate myself.
And what's coming up is that whatever we feel as individuals is contextualized by the generation that precedes us and maybe the generations that precede that, okay? And you use the example of the war, World War II. In Vietnam, there's also the history of not only the Vietnamese-American War, but the period of time after where there was so much hardship and famine. And so how it is we're coping with the conditions of our life experience also has a great deal to do with whether or not we can freely express what it is we feel. And so I think a lot of the things we learned have to do with how it is the generation before us coped with the conditions that they lived in, or even the generation before that. So while in one hand this is all about our individual experience of self-knowledge and self-awareness, it's always in a context that is beyond our full understanding. Okay, we don't even know that this is how we're taught. You know, these are the conditions that shaped our reality when we were just a sponge coming into the world figuring out what is life about. So this is also why this is discovered. You say you're 27 or 8 years old, I don't remember my 28, okay. And you know, for me now I'm 72, so this is the experience that comes from living long enough to realize that the discoveries of who we are come from living life, okay? And to be 35 and have something like a realization, for me that's not surprising, because you have to live life and to separate for yourself from the influences that were so such a big part of who we are. And the other piece of this is that when we're on our individual journey and discovering more and more what it means to be comfortable with our own autonomy, the right to be ourselves in the world, it also means that we have to reconcile the world around us. That not everyone is going to understand or appreciate. Or in fact, I would say sometimes people are either threatened by someone who's uniquely autonomous, or they're going to want you to fit in, to belong. There's a way in which there's pressures for each of us to comply or collude with, you know, what it means to fit. And of course, because our need for acceptance usually starts with acceptance of other first, and then we can accept ourselves, then this is getting to the point where accepting ourselves, despite the fact that maybe not everyone is going to appreciate or understand why we're living our way, taking control of our decisions, making our own mistakes even, you know.
Yeah. For me personally, like, the more I make mistakes, the more my self-awareness and self-acceptance really grows and strongly integrates within. But growing up, I had this strong sense, I mean, I felt so indifferent, because when it comes to emotions, I grew up in a family where, oh, I see violence, anger, all this kind of stuff. But I release through crying. But then the people around me always suppresses it out. But instead of listening about, okay, suppress, why are you showing that? Like, it feels good to me, so I'm gonna take it out. Growing up until puberty and all this stuff, heartbreaks, and the journey takes me in this kind of experiences that always brings me to tearing up. And my colleagues always says, like, why are you crying? You're so emotional. And then I just let it go, like, just cry. And today, looking back into what I did, listening to how I feel, it got me to a point where I feel so light because I'm not holding a lot within. and my, let's just say, intuition is stronger, because every time I speak to these people who told me to suppress, they have more, you know, like inner conflict, chaos. And then talking to them right now, it feels like it's really, I mean, self-knowledge, self-awareness, and acceptance. It came from the journey living life, right? But it also depends on the structure that the external world imposed in someone. Does that, for you, like, did you had this moment in your experience where you feel like, okay, it started like you won't follow your religion, but is there layers and layers and layers, every experiences that comes up, and you need to, you know, peel for you to be in tune with your true self?
What you're talking about is really important, because we make choices as to whether or not we allow ourselves to feel. You're using the word suppress. It's a good word. Repress is another one. So repression is when we put the emotion that's commensurate with the experience we're having, and we put it in the basement as if we shouldn't feel that. Okay? Restraint is actually a skill that says, okay, it's not appropriate right now for me to express this particular emotion, so I dial it down. Okay? Expression, and crying is a beautiful expression of an emotion, is the release of that emotion. Is the fluidity. Emotions are fluid. The fluidity of expression allows us to feel what we feel and for it to come through some form of expression. That's why creativity is so important, okay? Because whether it's music or dance or art or poetry, when we have an outlet for the feelings we have, as opposed to, and this is where trauma becomes such a big thing, is that trauma creates an impossibility to communicate or express the feeling because it's too big. So we repress it, and where does it come out? Through the cracks in the basement floor. At times when we go, why am I so angry? Because this little thing happened and I'm exploding into something quite inordinate for that event. So repression is a time bomb. Is waiting for things to happen, or it comes at such a strong price of control. Okay, we become very controlling when we have a lot of repressed emotion in our basement, in our subconscious. We have to control life, because if we don't, then the fear is we're going to be overwhelmed by the emotion that we've been repressing.
May I ask something about it? So you mentioned trauma, and that's a really beautiful metaphor. Is it possible for a person who has experienced trauma and repressed something to access it by themselves? I mean, I would guess that not really, but yeah, I guess a follow-up question would be, as a therapist, how do you help people look into that? Because they usually can't look directly into it, like it's too much, it would be too destructive for the psyche.
So, in order for us to be able to open the basement door and to see what it is that's been repressed, which, by the way, is a healthy response to a trauma that we're not ready for, okay? We only repress it, fight, flight, or freeze, survival skills, because otherwise we would be overwhelmed by it, particularly as a child. So the fact that we're traumatized and we go on as if everything is okay is actually a coping that is necessary and effective. But you're right, there it is underneath. And how does it affect us? Well, the past is carried into the present and into the, in life. Now, key concept. We really can't do the work of trauma until we feel safe enough in ourselves. Okay, if I'm unstable and unsafe and I'm coping in all these ways that are maybe unhealthy, then to try to open the door to see what that trauma is and how it affected me is not, it's a re-traumatization. Okay, so it's only when we've gotten to the point that we feel safe, and there's why therapy and you know, an awareness of how trauma works is so important, because it's only when we feel safe enough that we can start to revisit and review the impact that that trauma has had on us. Safety is a need, and
Sorry, just one more follow-up question here. Well, suppose a person has managed to create this safe space for them, say within their own household. So they have created a certain space. It might not be a very big space, but they can operate well enough, they can function well enough within this space. The space is supporting. But then what would motivate that person to open the door and look into the horror? Like, you know, I'm safe enough, I'm good enough, finally I'm safe enough. Like, why would I, you know, poke that? Like, what can motivate a person to go deeper and look into that if they manage to create that safety?
If I may, safety doesn't necessarily mean happy. So being safe is just like, okay, you have a base, you have like a home, for example, but is that the home you really wanted? And I think the difference between therapy and coaching, for example, is sometimes I have to say no to some customers, because if they are not okay with opening this trauma, then I will guide them to a therapist, because it's not my job. My job is more into actions, like, okay, you are aware of this trauma, so now you know the consequences of what it is doing to your life. So now what do you want to do for your future and in the present moment? While I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but therapy is more like, okay, maybe you're not that aware, so we need to dig really deeply into this trauma to make sure that, you know, it's like a wound. We need to open, and if you don't disinfect and do all this necessary stuff, then are you really safe?
I often think of trauma as being the past being carried along with us. And coping, which is a very important theme, can lead us to this place where, yeah, we think, I'm okay, I'm coping, I'm dealing with life, I'm functioning, I have a job, everything looks on the surface like I'm okay. But coping is not meant to be the same as living, especially fully from the inside out, okay? And coping wears thin. So what was very helpful when we needed it at the beginning doesn't feel the same 10 or 20 years later. And we start realizing that I'm just coping. I'm not really okay. And then that's when we feel the need, something's wrong. Yes, there's this history. Yes, I haven't looked at it. Yes, I've avoided it successfully. And it becomes quite self-evident that I either have to deal with it or I'm going to devolve into different kinds of coping, often unhealthy coping with escapism and these kinds of things. So there's a readiness, and I actually think it takes often about 10 years of adulthood. You don't see too many 23-year-olds. Well, I used to work a lot with a horrible reality of childhood sexual abuse. And I often found that it wasn't until someone was in their late 20s or early 30s that they were ready to have enough of themselves to be able to reflect back on what happened. There's so much that goes into keeping it repressed that it's not until that point or even later that the person starts to go, okay, now is part of what I have to face. It isn't something where you say, okay, should I open the door or not? It's much more like, No, the door is being knocked on from the other side, and it's like, okay, there's something here I have to face, okay?
And I just want to add something because I read it somewhere, like triggers, these are gifts from heaven. Because when it's time for us to look into that basement door, it will always, and it will always come up, and you can't escape from it. And that where you know, the defense mechanism, the coping comes in, but then it wears off later on. So whatever comes right now, that's the only thing that you need to deal, and then, you know, things will, I'm not saying that things will come up after that, next and next and next, but there's perfect time for that trauma to come up when it's time for it to be faced. That's what you've said, Douglas. Like, if you have created this safe space, if you have created this strong sense of, okay, am I ready? Okay, let's deal with it.
But I believe that it's really your choice. Sometimes, you know, you have these triggers, but it's up to you to decide when you want to deal with them. Because sometimes I've seen some clients, you know, they're like, yeah, I am aware that, you know, something happened in my life in the past, but I'm not ready yet. And it's completely okay, because what I don't like, as you know, when you are work in this environment of helping people to be more aware, is kind of like this guru role, like, you know, I know, so I will show you, and whether you're ready or not, it's the way it is. And I don't like this kind of thing. So always trying to give the choice to this person as, oh, you have this problem, that's fine. Do you want to work on it? And if you don't, it's okay too, because at the end of the day, self-development is for your whole life. I mean, I'm 40, I cannot wait, and I'm sure at 80 I will still have some triggers and trauma, but I will, oh, here it is, I forgot about this one. So yeah, but it's always remember that it's your decision to work on it or not, and nobody should force you to do so.
Yeah, I agree. I call it readiness, okay? And you can't force things, and certainly a therapist should never be intrusive into someone else's process. It's really the opening up to what people are ready, and particularly they have to feel safe, and that's one of the things about therapy. It's so important that a person feels safe enough to be able to have the willingness to go to the place they've been avoiding most of their life, you know.
Put it in the cultural context though, because I feel like, you know, it's funny being a person from a place which is between the West and the East, both geographically and culture-wise. I still, like, my generation was definitely raised on the Western definition of normality. So when I think about what is normal, I think about what is normal in America, even though there is quite a bit of, like, there is a difference, in fact, between life there and life where I was raised, which I guess also creates a certain amount of conflict. But am I correct in my assumption that in the Eastern culture, well, Marie-Cathy would probably give some perspective on that, community and family is a significant part of that coping. So actually, if a person has, say, a trauma, they might just keep functioning within their community, and if they're getting enough support, and maybe if their coping mechanisms are reinforced by the society around, it's easier to just, like, it might not be optimal from the Western point of view of what an individual should be like, but it's pretty optimal from the Eastern point of view when you function quite well within this social context that you have around you. Like, to what extent do you think these cultural differences affect how people measure, you know, sanity, normality?
Whew, that's a big one.
You know, I just talked about this to my roommate yesterday, and in my experience, I grew up in both culture, East and West, so it was really like a very big struggle, because in France it's all about freedom and your individuality and celebrating yourself, Which at home, it was more like you need to be in the family. We are a community, so at least I would say, it's not that your individuality doesn't exist, but family first. Family comes first all the time. So it was really, really difficult to know what is right and what is wrong. And so I came to the conclusion that there's no right or wrong, actually, but instead of feeling ashamed or don't understand which culture should I follow, I decided, I am very rich because I have both cultures, so I'm taking what is best in one and one is best in the other one. And I would say that, yeah, culture is an indication, but it's not necessarily the way. So you just, choose what you want to take and what you want to release, like emotion.
Yeah.
But I'm very happy when I am with my family, but when I want to have this individual, I become French. So it's like having a mask.
For my experience, being raised in an Asian community since I was born and raised in the Philippines, and we are culturally really into community and family orientation. So I mentioned that I really fought for my individuality, even if people around me are trying to repress or suppress that side of myself, but I kind of like fought for it. And then the journey of traveling across Western countries made me realize that, these people are too individualized, and I kind of like navigated my way around it with still having the background of my family, but I have to detach myself from them for me to be able to navigate my way, my life, the way other people are showing it to me, because I grew out from the community that I belong to. So the people I was surrounded with was really into their own individuality and self-actualize. For us, back in the Philippines, I can see the people, my colleagues, my friends that I'm really close to, they're still in that state of, like family orientation. Okay. They haven't really explored their individuality and they don't know who they are, which for me in that sense, I feel like just step outside, just discover yourself, but it doesn't land in their head. Right. It really didn't like make sense. But I also got to a point where I detached myself to that community, too individualized, that I was so lonely. And and that gave me a really conclusion that not the Western culture, you are so free and individualized, but you're actually living a life without external connection, like so lonely. Like so now in my journey, I feel like I have to find my way to come back to a healthy community to attach to, and also not to lose myself within the community.
I think this is a profound question, and Thich Nhat Hanh was the one who actually said the next enlightenment is community. So if we can think of how we can develop as individuals, it doesn't mean to take a path that separates ourselves from community or family. It's rather that in the ways in which we come to be ourselves, we include ourselves as part of, I like the word humanity, okay? So there's another way to look at it. One is what I call the 3 levels of desire. Okay, level 1 is childlike. Okay, I want what I want when I want it. Okay, and we shouldn't get rid of that. Okay, but mostly if we mature, we're going to move to level 2, which is I want what's good for me, what's healthy, what considers my well-being. Okay, and level 3 is is my desire to want what's good for me and is congruent with humanity. Okay, it's not separate. It's not isolating myself as a way of being oppositional, or it's looking at how each one of us as individuals can represent what is the potential for humanity. And it certainly isn't a diminishment of something. I think it goes back to whether our communities and families have guidance that's too restrictive and requires us to limit ourselves, or whether it holds the balance that allows us each to discover who we are. And in that case, the community is such an important part of who we are. It's not an either or. In fact, I think the ideal is when each one of us can be true to ourselves in ways that commit to being with others. I mean, this is an example of it. Okay, here we are, deciding to share our stories and our truths because we value what comes from this. The fact that we're communicating through these topics that we're all grappling with.
So as we are coming to an end with this conversation, just to make sure that we all are living with clarity and, we can summarize and close the space by sharing, last insight for whatever we have tackled, self-awareness, self-acceptance, and just living inside out. Like, would you like to share anything, anyone? Just a short takeaway, like an insight that we got out from this dialogue. I would like to start.
Yes.
Let me just start that. Hearing different perspective from all of the three of you, it actually gave me, a thought popped out that all of us has different journeys, and me personally, I have this like judgment towards people, and I try to really reflect as to which part of myself I'm still like judging, because whatever is in reflects out. And then that gave me the conclusion that it's just an acceptance. If I accept myself within, I also accept the people around, that they all have their own journeys. We can't drag them down, we can't pull them up. So with this conversation, it opened my mind, like, this reflection is totally, it kind of like integrated today, which I'm happy to have this conversation. As what I've said, like, we learn by listening to each other's stories. There's always wisdom behind all these individuals that we meet. So just being open.
I guess I was able to formulate my insight from today. Thank you so much for this conversation. I'm catching myself that, with the questions I'm asking, like today and in general, whenever I search for some information or talk to people, I still have this, like, speaking of having enough guidance, I still have this inner child part who's really looking for someone to tell me what's right and what's wrong, and to explain how things should be, and like what's the right approach, how things are supposed to be. And actually, there is no such thing. I mean, of course, there are certain, I guess, generally accepted truths, but in the end, I need to foster this, adult part of myself, self in general, to develop a better ability to navigate the world and how I see it works by myself, because nobody is really going to tell me what's right and wrong. And it's a useful thought to keep in mind, not to cling to that and not to look for that external, benevolent figure who knows it all, because I guess there is no such thing. But that being said, I'm very grateful for all the wisdom that you guys shared, for your perspective, and thank you, Douglas, for making for helping me make even more sense out of your book with your comments on that.
My takeaway from this conversation is that I'm very grateful, and I really have hope in this world now that we can meet other people from other culture, some people that we barely met, and we are aligned with the feelings and all this conversation. And when I see the world right now, it doesn't look like so good, but at the same time, having this small conversation gives a different perspective. So I'm like, yeah, there's so much to do, and we should continue in that sense. So thank you for that, and it's just confirmed that I'm on the good way, and I'm on my right direction.
You know, we are unique. There's a certain kind of validation when we're hearing each other and either recognizing how much we share a common truth, a sense of what it is that resonates with our ideas, or even the ways in which we see things uniquely different. But the fact that we could spend an hour and a half and let it go by so quickly, sharing the richness of these questions, is where the connection occurs. There's actually a huge distance between all of us because we've come our own paths. But the fact that we can have the kind of conversation where with I think is a lot of caring and sharing, we can feel the connection that comes from that. So for me, this is a deeply satisfying. It's what I hoped for, to have the kind of conversation, even in front of a camera, where it feels real and it feels like we're exploring good things, So.
And it beautifully unfolded the way how it's supposed to be. And yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Douglas. Thank you for your time and presence. I hope we stay connected and support each other after this and what's coming up next. So yeah,